Oh, I remember when I was a little girl, Mama used to say she could always tell when it was about to rain, 'cause her elbow would get creaky. But in my smart mouth, I'd say to her, Mama, forget that old elbow. I just listen for the thunder. Well, Mama's elbow didn't always get it right. But see, thunder don't lie. Oh, that night of the Passover. Ooh, I love talking about the Passover. I love remembering how God delivered us, you know? Well, see, that night, everybody just wanted to see him. I mean, everybody had heard about Jesus. You know, I remember some Greeks showed up, and they pleaded with Philip to just let them see him. I guess that was all of us in some sense. We all just wanted to be in the same room with him. I mean, it's like that feeling you get when you know something is about to happen. Like Mama's elbow, you know? You can't quite explain it, you just know. Well, we all just wanted to be there when it happened. So then, Jesus started talking about things that were to come. He said, my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? No. It was for this very reason that I have come to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Woo! And then that old thunder came booming down right on time. Yes, it did. And now, this wasn't some noise just off in the distance. Oh, no. This here was a thunderclap sent straight from heaven. Yes, sir. And you know what? It wasn't just thunder. It was the voice of God. He said, I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again. Woo! My Lord. You know, I remember somebody saying, is it gonna rain? I looked at him and said, child, no. That ain't thunder. No. That was God. That was a triumphant noise. Honey, that was God's glory setting fire to the air in anticipation for what is to come. And baby, you didn't need no creaky elbow to know that. Oh.
Well, we're in the 5th week of our study, 40 Days with Jesus, walking with people who had face-to-face encounters with Jesus on his journey to the cross. And as a recap, in the first week when we started, we looked at John the Baptist, who was preparing the way for a new beginning. Our second week, we looked at Simon Peter, who wrestled with an unmet expectation, and he learned to trust in Jesus' strength. Our third week, Jesus cleansed the temple, reminding us that, you know what? Sometimes rescue begins with disruption. Last week, we looked at Nicodemus and his story, the rule keeper. We discovered that what he really needed was a rescue through belief. He came in the dark, seeking the light. Well, today, we come to a story filled with anticipation. A moment right before everything changes. Jesus is in Jerusalem for the Passover, and the crowd is buzzing. And then, those in the crowd hear thunder. But you know what? Not everybody heard the same thing. Before high school baseball, Isaiah played rec league. baseball, and some of you have experienced that before. And it always drive us nuts when there were thunderstorms in the area and all around the field. You could see those dark clouds on the horizon, but it would be as sunny as it could be right where you were on the field, and then they would pause the game because of lightning. You know how that feels? Yep. Sometimes you could hear the rumble of thunder, but most of the time, you just really had to trust those weather apps that were saying that, hey, there's lightning nearby. Well, then there were other times when we would be there and you could see the storm approaching. The sky would get darker and darker. You could see the rain. You could hear the thunder. And you could see the lightning. And, you knew the game was going to be postponed for a period of time. In both circumstances, the game would be paused. And we would wait out our 15 minutes, I think it is, and, hoping and praying that there would be no more lightning so we could keep going in the game and not have a reset on that waiting clock. Just don't like the clock. But that same thing, happens in all sports, at all ages. Several years ago, a high school football game in Texas had to be paused midway through the third quarter. Not because of rain, not necessarily because of lightning, but because of a single clap of thunder. Where there's thunder, there's lightning, they say. Spectators said it was the loudest sound they had ever heard. One moment the sky was clear, and the next, boom! It felt like the whole stadium shook, they said. Players dropped to a knee, nobody moved, and they ended up just calling off the game, even though there was no lightning, no rain. That clap of thunder. They just didn't know. But it was enough. And that's a reminder to us that sometimes the atmosphere shifts, things change. Whether we understand it or not, something big going to happen. And that's the kind of moment we find ourselves in John chapter 12. Jesus knows that his hour has come. He begins to speak about his death, his purpose, and then a voice thunders from heaven. Some people hear thunder, others hear God, and the difference between the two, well, it's the condition of their hearts. In the video we heard the woman talk about who remembered that night, well, she recalls that her mama, would always say that her elbow was hurting when it was about to rain. We all understand that, don't we? Our joints start to hurt when we know rain is coming. And how she would always say, well, forget the elbow, I listen for the thunder. And then she smiles and thinks back to that day in Jerusalem. Greeks showed up pleading with Philip to see him, and all of us were waiting with some kind of sense. We all just wanted to be in the same room. And Jesus starts talking about what's to come. And then the old thunder came booming. And, it wasn't just thunder, she says. It was the voice of God. Folks, what do we do when God speaks? And it sounds like thunder. Let's find out together today. So as we begin, Jesus is clear when he's talking to his disciples. The hour has come. We begin in John chapter 12, verse 20, and it says, Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the feast. They came to Philip with the request, Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Greeks are outsiders. These folks are Gentiles. And yet they wanted to see Jesus. Their arrival onto the scene, into this picture, is signaling something important. Jesus' message is about to go global. Well, Jesus doesn't answer them directly. Instead, he makes a powerful declaration in verse 23. It says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Now, this was no ordinary moment. Up until now, up until this point in the Gospel of John, Jesus has been saying over and over again, my time has not yet come, but now it is. It has. It's here. It's kind of like D-Day in World War II. On June the 6th, 1944, Allied forces launched D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. For months, generals and had been planning and preparing for this moment. But when the ships left England and headed across the English Channel, there was no turning back. That moment, when those boats hit the beaches, that was the turning point. Victory was not yet complete, but the decisive hour had come. One military historian said, before D-Day, we were losing. After D-Day, we were just waiting to win. Just like D-Day marked the beginning of the end of World War II, Jesus' declaration here, the hour has come, marked the beginning of the end of sin's reign. See, the cross was near. The battle was not yet finished, but the decisive hour had arrived. The moment of ultimate rescue was approaching. Jesus goes on to explain in verse 24, I tell you the truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. You see, Jesus is describing what is getting ready to happen. And he is saying here that unless he gives his life, the impact is limited. If he only came to preach great sermons, perform some miracles, and draw crowds, but did not go to the cross, then he is nothing more than a great preacher, a great teacher, a prophet, or even a healer. He would be just one more voice in a long line of religious leaders. Being his follower would be nothing more than selecting to follow any one of the religions that are going on around the world. But Jesus did not come just to inspire people. No, he did not come just to gather followers. No, he came to lay down his life. And in doing so, death would not be the end. But it was just the beginning. Like that seed falling to the ground, his sacrifice would bring life. Not just to one, but to many. You know, I thank God every day that he did. Because that single act, one man willingly laying down his life, opened the door for all of us, all the way down to today, to live. Jesus knew what was coming. And he embraced it. Why? Because he understood his mission. He knew what he was sent here to do. His mission wasn't about comfort or making people feel good or anything like that. It was always about the rescue. Second, this morning we see that thunder demands a response. You know, as I talked about, at the beginning, outdoor sporting events, thunder is an audible expression of lightning, and that demands a response. Go and seek shelter, pause the games, and get out of the weather, right? Thunder rang through the sky that day in Jerusalem, and it also demanded a response. Jesus continues in verse 25 and says, the man who loves his life will lose it. And while the man who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. And then Jesus opens his heart in verse 27. He says, now my heart is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And then in verse 28, it says, then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. She said it in the opening video. Some heard thunder, but others heard the voice of God. And as she said, that wasn't thunder, that was God. That was a triumphant noise. That was His glory setting the air on fire with anticipation for what was to come. You see, when God speaks, not everyone hears it the same way. Jesus said in verse 30, "This voice was for your benefit, not mine." Are we listening today? And everyone's probably familiar with the dog whistle. You've seen them before, right? I would ask you if you've ever heard one, but we don't hear them as humans because it's a pitch at a frequency outside of our range of hearing. But when you blow the whistle, everybody just looks like, "What are you doing? You look kind of silly." But then all of a sudden, the dogs that are around, they notice, don't they? Their head perks up. Their ears twitch, their heads tilt. They know that something's going on because the sound was meant for them. The signal is there. It's very loud, but only some hear it. That's often what happens when God speaks. Some hear thunder and noise. Others hear the voice. The crowd around Jesus in John 12 all heard the very same sound. But not everyone understood what it was. Some thought it was thunder. Others said maybe an angel spoke, but only a few realized that God was speaking right there in that moment in their lives. The difference was not in the volume of the voice, but in the posture of the heart. And when our hearts are tuned in, when we are truly listening, God's voice cuts through the noise and the distractions of our lives. Because you know what? God still speaks today. Sometimes softly, sometimes through thunderous moments in our lives. And the question is, are we listening? A long time ago, before the age of refrigerators, people used ice houses to preserve food. Ice houses had thick walls, no windows, and a tightly fitted door. And in the winter, when streams and lakes were frozen, huge blocks of ice were cut and hauled into the ice houses and covered with sawdust. And, often that ice would last all the way into the summer. The story is told, though, that a man had lost his watch while working in an ice house. And he searched for it diligently, carefully, looking through the sawdust, but he just couldn't find it. His fellow workers also looked for it, but that was futile. They couldn't find it. And a small boy heard about what was going on, and, he slipped into the ice house during the noon hour, and he soon emerged with the watch. Well, everybody was like, "What in the world just happened? How in the world did he find it?" Well, the boy said, "Well, I closed the door, I lay down on the sawdust, kept very still. Soon, I heard the watch ticking." Often the question is not whether God is speaking, but whether we are being still enough and quiet enough to hear. This morning, are we brushing off God's voice as just another noise in our lives? Are we hearing His call to draw near? May we always be ready to hear however God chooses to speak to us today. And finally, this morning, we see that the cross is the rescue. In John chapter 12, verse 31, Jesus continues and says, "Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. But I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to myself." He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. This moment, Jesus being lifted up, he's pointing to the cross. The rescue does not come in power or in triumph as we might expect. It comes through surrender. It comes through the cross. You see, the cross is where the judgment of the world falls. The cross is where the enemy is defeated. The cross is where Jesus rescues us. Then Jesus gives the crowd and us an invitation. Starting at verse 35, it says, you are going to have the light just a while longer. Walk while you have the light before darkness overtakes you. The man who walks in the dark does not know where he is going. Put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become sons of light. You know, someone has once written, it's tough to be in the dark and not let the dark get to you. The unending struggle for the Christian is to walk in the light and at the same time keep moving into the shadows. We've got to trust the light. You know, when was the last time we needed to use our cell phone as a flashlight? Mine was yesterday, to be honest here, you know. Maybe it was to look for something in the garage, or to read a menu in a darkly lit restaurant, or to find something in the backyard at night. Why did we need it? Well, isn't it obvious that it has to do with something with the dark or the darkness? You know, as a sinner living with other sinners in a fallen world, we encounter darkness in our lives every single day. While we may experience Instagram-worthy sunny day picnic lunches, the reality of life is that it's more of a midnight walk through the woods. On any given day, we probably encounter more darkness than we do truth. So to move forward without danger and get to where we are meant to go, we need something to light our way. Thankful God has given us the very thing we need. No passage, I think, gets at this need and God's provision better than Psalm 119, verse 105. Your lamp, your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. May we get into the Word, folks. In John chapter 12, the voice of thunder was not just about that moment. It was an invitation to believe, to walk in the light, and to be rescued. You know, the woman in that video didn't just hear the thunder. She heard something deeper. God's voice calling out in glory and power. That wasn't thunder, that was God, she said. When Jesus is lifted up and the cross is revealed, when the invitation comes to believe, what do we hear? Do we hear thunder? Or do we hear the voice of a loving Father calling us home? Maybe this morning you're standing in the crowd like those Greeks, longing to see Jesus. Maybe you've been brushing off the thunder, assuming that it's just another noise in the distractions and the chaos of our world. But what if God is speaking to you? This is your hour. This is your invitation. The cross still stands, folks. The voice still speaks. Will you hear it? And will you come to the light?